I was 14 when my mother looked me dead in the eye and said something I'll never forget. Every strand beyond your father's hairline is a personal attack. I didn't answer her. What could I say to that? It's been 8 months since then. 8 months since I started counting the number of times I caught her watching me with hatred, not in her voice, but in her silence. Then this morning, she saw something on her phone. Her face went pale, and she hasn't eaten or spoken since. Just frozen, like something finally snapped. My father? He always said, "No child of mine is allowed to have more hair than I do." And he meant it. He believed it with a religious intensity. In our home, that wasn't just a joke. It was a rule, a law, a punishment waiting to happen. At 14, every child in our family was expected to undergo what they called follicle reduction, but it wasn't some fancy hair treatment. It was surgery. Brutal, invasive surgery meant to stretch and scar the scalp to mimic our father's baldness. Anything more than his patchy crown was labeled vanity, rebellion, disrespect. He had spent his entire life waging war against his own reflection. Baldness wasn't just something that happened to him. It was the thing that defined him. He kept a scrapbook filled with photos of public figures and criminals with full heads of hair. Every face was circled in red marker, stamped with a letter V, V for vain. My mother was no better. She had thinning hair from her 20s, and she carried that bitterness like armor. She once told me that women with long hair were greedy and attention hoarders. In her eyes, they stole everything she never had: beauty, power, control. And that's how my parents fell in love, at a support group, for people who blamed the world for their hair loss. From that moment on, their shared trauma didn't bring healing. It gave them purpose, a mission, to ensure that no child under their roof would ever humiliate them by growing what they had lost. I used to think I was the only one they did this to, that maybe I'd misread things. Maybe it wasn't as sinister as I remembered. But that illusion shattered when my older sister returned home one summer after turning 18. She was wearing a hoodie, even though it was 90 degrees outside. I hugged her and she flinched. Later that night, when I walked past her room, the door was cracked just wide enough to see her sitting in front of a mirror. She had removed the hoodie. Her scalp was a maze of scar tissue and stretch marks, a surgical battlefield. Tufts of hair clung to the sides like survivors of a massacre. The crown was smooth, raw, and unnatural, like it had been carved down on purpose. I asked her what happened. She didn't answer. She just whispered, "Don't let them take it from you. Not all of it. Hide it if you have to, but don't let them take it." After that, she left the next morning without saying goodbye. I didn't see her again for over a year. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't overreaction or cultural quirk. This was mutilation, disguised as family tradition. And I was next. They started the conditioning when I was barely 6. At first, it was small. No braids, no ponytails, no admiring yourself in the mirror. Compliments about my hair were met with cold stares or lectures. By 9, the barbershop visits became mandatory. Weekly, my father would inspect the clippers himself before each cut, making sure they shaved just close enough to show scalp, but not so close as to draw suspicion. When I turned 12, they told me I'd been blessed with an ugly burden, that my thick, fast-growing hair was a curse they were determined to correct before it turned me into someone dangerous. You think you're better than us? You think having follicles makes you superior? You didn't earn that hair. They said these things over breakfast, at church, on birthdays. Every year I got older, they intensified the rhetoric, called it humility training, said that people who love their appearance become narcissists, that pride in the body leads to sin. But deep down, I could tell it wasn't about virtue. It was about power, because they couldn't control what nature gave me, and that terrified them. By 13, the warning stopped. They had a date set, a surgeon selected, a recovery room booked. They called it my rebirth. I called it what it really was, a controlled demolition of identity. 2 months before the surgery, I stopped sleeping, not because I was scared of pain. I was scared of disappearing. They weren't just trying to take my hair. They were trying to erase any trace of me that didn't fit into their twisted mold. My face, my scalp, my reflection, everything was about to be rewritten in their image. That's when I made the decision. I wouldn't fight them directly. That would be pointless. My father was a former military medic. My mother used to be a hospital administrator. They knew how to lie to doctors. They knew how to frame consent. So I'd have to go deeper, more desperate, more disgusting. I started researching how to sabotage the procedure, how to make myself ineligible without raising alarms. That's when I found a thread about contact dermatitis, a severe skin reaction triggered by specific chemicals or metals. I bought a cheap shampoo brand from a dollar store, one loaded with synthetic fragrance and preservatives. Then I added crushed nickel shavings I secretly shaved off a keychain. Every morning, I massaged it into my scalp, let it sit for 10 minutes. Then I rinsed it and acted normal. Within days, the itching started, then the redness, then the scabs, then bleeding. My pillowcases stained, my hairline crusted. My scalp looked like it had been dragged across asphalt. And for the first time in years, my mother looked concerned. She wasn't worried about me, of course. She was worried about the procedure. Your skin isn't healing, she said. If we do the surgery like this, the grafts won't take. I could see the war in her eyes, disgust versus disappointment. They consulted the surgeon. He delayed the operation twice, suggested dermatological clearance. But time was running out. I was getting closer to 15, and that terrified them. They said puberty would cement the damage, that if my body started producing more androgens, my hair might thicken even more. And if that happened, they claimed it might be irreversible. That's when the gloves came off. They stopped letting me bathe unsupervised, took away my access to hygiene products, started applying ointments themselves. My mother began sleeping on the floor next to my bed. One night, I woke up to a strange burning sensation. She was rubbing something into my scalp while whispering, "This will purify you. This will fix everything." I asked her what it was. She said, "It's from the Institute." What institute? She never answered. The next day, I started vomiting. My vision blurred. My hair began falling out in chunks. But not the way they wanted, not the way they could control. This was rot. This was infection. This was chaos. They panicked, took me to a clinic 3 towns over, used fake names, told the nurse I had eczema complications. They tried to blame me, said I overused styling products, said I was vain, said this was my own doing. But they didn't expect the nurse to report it. The nurse who saw me, she didn't buy their story. She kept asking me questions, ones my parents tried to answer for me. But she was sharp. She noticed how I winced when they touched my shoulder, how I looked at the floor when they spoke. She quietly handed me a sticky note as she checked my blood pressure. It read, "Say nothing. Nod twice if you need help." I nodded. Once. Twice. 15 minutes later, a social worker entered the room, then a second nurse, then 2 police officers. My father tried to talk his way through it, leaning on his credentials, flashing his old ID badge, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. My mother started crying, pulling out family photos, pointing to birthday parties and school awards. But I stayed quiet, and when the officer asked me directly, "Did they hurt you?" I simply turned my head to show my scalp, fresh burn marks, blistering, pus oozing near the nape of my neck. He didn't need more than that. I was removed from the room immediately, placed in a temporary holding unit with security outside the door. That night, I overheard 2 nurses talking in the hallway. One said, "They've been reported before, but nothing ever stuck." The other replied, "Because they move every few years. Change counties, change names. It's a pattern." It wasn't just me. It wasn't just my sister. This was systemic, refined, an operation. Within 24 hours, I was in foster care. And for the first time in my life, I saw a mirror and didn't flinch. Even though my hair was patchy and my scalp looked like a war zone, I knew it was mine. My parents were arrested, briefly, but they posted bail. The state tried to press charges: medical neglect, child endangerment, unauthorized surgical intent. But their lawyers were sharp, and they spun the narrative like master storytellers. Claimed it was all a case of misunderstood alternative medicine and parental rights. But something unexpected happened. My sister came back. She had been living in another state under a different name. When she found out I had escaped, she drove 14 hours straight and walked into the courtroom mid-trial. She brought receipts, photos, journals, medical records, burn logs, even an audio recording of my mother whispering about reversing vanity through purity. That broke the case wide open. They couldn't dodge both of us. It didn't happen overnight. There was no clean break, no satisfying final scene where the monsters get locked away and the hero walks off into the sunset. No, healing is messier than that. It's slow and terrifying, because after escaping something that controlled every second of your life, you're left with a question no one warns you about. Who am I without them? For the first few months, I didn't even know how to pick out my own clothes. I'd reach for plain grays and blacks, the kind they always made me wear to avoid standing out. I flinched when people complimented me. I avoided mirrors, even though the surgeries never happened, even though I should have felt free. But trauma doesn't care about logic. It sneaks in when you're brushing your teeth or when a stranger's voice sounds just a bit too much like your father's. And yet, every week, I got a little stronger. I started journaling. Not about them, but about me. What I liked, what I hated, what colors made me feel alive. I started therapy. At first, I lied to the therapist, out of habit. But eventually, I broke down, told her everything. And she didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She looked me in the eye and said, "You are real. You are enough. And you don't owe your pain to anyone." That broke something open in me. I dyed my hair electric blue one week, then shaved it off the next, just to feel what freedom tasted like. I started speaking at support groups for survivors of medical coercion. I testified again in a civil case against my parents. This time, they didn't walk free. My mother was sentenced to 6 years. My father, 4. They'll likely get out early, but it doesn't matter, because they can't touch me anymore. And my sister? She's my best friend now. We don't talk about the house, or the basement, or the cleansing rituals. But sometimes she sends me voice notes at 2 a.m. that say things like, "You wore that blue hair better than anyone." Or, "They don't get to rewrite us anymore. We're building something real now, something without manipulation, without shame, without masks." And maybe that's the greatest revenge of all. Closing message to the audience. If you're watching this, and something about this story feels too familiar, if you've been gaslit into believing your body is wrong, or your reflection is a sin to be corrected, let me be the voice that breaks the spell. You are not broken. You were never the problem. And your survival is a rebellion they will never understand. They'll call it selfish when you set boundaries. They'll call it betrayal when you walk away. But walking away is not betrayal. It's self-rescue. You deserve to exist without needing to apologize for your appearance, your identity, or your hair, no matter what they told you. And if no one else says it to you today, let me be the first. You are real. You are enough. And you are finally free.